Hello there, everyone. It is Monday, May 11th, and it's time for another edition of Tracking the Tropics. Meteorologist Jim Dickey here in the ABC 7 Hurricane Center. Things have been pretty quiet across the Atlantic anyway since Alberto made landfall on the Florida Panhandle. It's been anything but quiet, though, in the Eastern Pacific. In fact, last week we had our first major hurricane of the 2018 Eastern Pacific hurricane season in Aleta. All that's left of that now, just look on the left-hand side of your screen, that sort of band of cirrus clouds. That storm is falling apart. What is not falling apart, and what your eye is likely drawn to on this satellite loop, is, as the banner there suggests, Hurricane Bud. Major Hurricane Bud. As of the latest advisory, the 8 a.m. advisory on Monday, this is a major hurricane as well. Two straight major hurricanes in the Eastern Pacific to start the season. Winds 115 miles per hour. It's moving to the north and west at 10 miles per hour. That's an important change to what we were talking about with Aleta. That storm was what we call a fish storm. Stayed out over the water, fell apart, no impact to anyone whatsoever, despite the fact that, yeah, it was a pretty powerful hurricane there for a bit. This has more of a northerly component, meaning it's moving towards land, in particular moving towards the Baja Peninsula there, Baja California. So I do want you to note the sea surface temperatures. Where it is right now, this bathwater, water temperatures in the mid-80s, definitely warming up to support tropical formation, as we've seen with both Aleta and now Bud. But as it moves to the north, note the water temperatures closer to the Baja Peninsula. We're talking 76-degree temperatures just to the south there. And then to the west of the peninsula, we're talking water temperatures in the middle and upper 60s. Nowhere near warm enough to support tropical formation. This is what we see on the Pacific coast, the west coast of the United States. The current comes from north to south, so it drags that colder water down. That's why even in the middle of the summer, the waters are still pretty chilly on the Pacific coast into California and Mexico there. But as it encounters that cooler water, the expectations are it will weaken. So it's not out of the question that we've actually seen this morning Bud peak in intensity. As it moves its way to the north and west, the waters cool down, and the storm should fall off in intensity to react to that. We're talking by the time it gets close to a potential landfall, a weakening tropical storm. But still, we'll have to watch this. We're talking the time frame late Friday through early Saturday. There's a chance we could see a landfall on Baja California. That's sort of a thin strip of land to sort of try to hit exactly with the center. And you have to remember what the cone of concern is. Think back to Irma. We were talking about this over and over again. There's the center line, and then the cone represents the average forecast error at each time interval. It gets wider as you go out. So the average error suggests it could be anywhere from the western edge of that cone to the eastern edge of that cone. So again, something we're going to be keeping an eye on as we get into the later part of the week. Good news is, not a threat to the United States. So let's switch gears, switch basins, go into the Atlantic, and June tends to be a pretty quiet month in the Atlantic basin. When we do see formation, it tends to be pretty close to home. The Gulf of Mexico, the Southwest Atlantic, and you see the two paths I have outlined here, these two typical tracks. One, the eastern one, pretty close to what Alberto did. Moved out of the southern and western Caribbean Sea, moved its way into the eastern Gulf. See, that other path takes something from the western Caribbean, across the Yucatan, into the western Gulf of Mexico. So keep that in the back of your head as we look at what's going on right now in the Atlantic. So we tend to see things being very quiet across the open tropical Atlantic this time of year. Typically speaking, we don't see storms get going off the coast of Africa, and a good many hurricanes, the most powerful through history, are what we call Cape Verde storms, sort of clusters of storms that move off the coast of Africa. We don't start to see that happen until, again, typically speaking, we get to August, and we have our typical June quiet out there right now. There's lots of Saharan dust, dry air sweeping off the coast of Africa to keep everything very quiet right now. But as we sweep closer to home, as we look at the Southern Caribbean, look at the blow up of thunderstorms this morning. That's the bright red you're seeing. Broad low pressure here, and a little plume of deep tropical moisture that we're going to have to watch as we work our way through the week. Again, think back to those typical June paths and watch what this model, and this is the European forecast model, is showing. You're looking at tropical moisture, the precipitable water values. That deep red is that broad low pressure, and that area of tropical moisture, as we work our way into Thursday, moves its way into the Gulf of Mexico. And here we are by late Thursday, early Friday. Note how the winds are going. There's a broad, but it's there, a broad counterclockwise flow to the winds, suggesting, again, low pressure. And there's some indications that something could try to close off and spin up here. Now, if you've been following social media, you may have been seeing runs of the American GFS model, which going back to last week was showing a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. I think the chances of that are very low, but I think there is at least a possibility that a weak tropical system could try to come together in this environment later this week. And it would bring the threat for some locally heavy rainfall, at the very least, to the coast of Texas. So something we'll be watching for. But as far as the NHC is concerned, no tropical development is expected through the next 5 days across the entirety of the Atlantic basin. Always something that's good to see during hurricane season. All right, let's look at our takeaways. So yeah, we're going to keep an eye on Hurricane Bud right now, major Hurricane Bud in the eastern Pacific as it noses towards the coast, Baja California of Mexico later on this week. We're also going to have to keep an eye on the Gulf of Mexico, the western Gulf of Mexico, where broad low pressure and tropical moisture is going to lift in, and there's a chance something could try to spin up as we work towards the weekend. Of course, neither of these pose any threat whatsoever at this time to southwest Florida. We're going to keep it quiet here with no tropical impacts expected anytime soon. I'll be keeping an eye on what is or is not going to happen in the Gulf of Mexico. I'll likely be back with another update later on this week, so keep an eye out for that. Until then, meteorologist Jim Dickey. Have a great day.